Welcome to 205H Part 2, and now we're going to discuss Section 72 on mobile home and RV parks. Both these types of installations are meant to accommodate temporary accommodations. Therefore, we need to make sure that we have the right rules in order to size their services appropriately. Camping is a great way to spend time with family and friends, but trekking off into the backwoods with a trailer or a tent isn't as common as you might think. Instead, when people go camping today, we tend to bring along a lot of the luxury items that we have at home. Therefore, we can camp, but we also have all of our conveniences, such as ice makers and coffee machines and Cuisinarts, and whatever else might make our stay more enjoyable. Because of this, our RV park services are experiencing much higher demand load than in previous generations. So we have to think about how do we accommodate those new loads that people are bringing with them from their houses. Let's start by talking about the type of receptacles that we will typically find on either an RV or mobile home site. There are 4 different types of receptacles that are approved for use inside an RV site. We have the 515R receptacle, which is 15 amps and 125 volts. We have a 520R receptacle, which is 20 amps and 125 volts. Both of those must have GFCI protection. We also have a TT30R receptacle, which is a specialized 30 amp 120 volt receptacle that is utilized for RV connection. Or we can have a 14-50R, which is a 50 amp 125 250 volt dual voltage receptacle, and is typically what we'd use for a range receptacle as well. Depending on the size of the unit being parked on the site, we could use any one of these 4 items. For example, very large motorhomes would use the 1450R, whereas smaller units that incorporate an air conditioner will usually use the 30 amp receptacle. Any trailer that does not have an air conditioning unit can use a 15 or 20 amp receptacle, or if we're looking at tent sites, that would also incorporate those 2 types of receptacles. When it comes to mobile homes, according to Rule 72-108, the connection must be permanent unless there's a deviation that allows for it to be connected to a 14-50R receptacle, but that's not very common because it's a very small service. We need to make sure that when we install them vertically, we place the U-shaped bonding post on the top of the outlet. You'll find that most of the cords that are built for RVs will also have that ground terminal on the top of it, and then it will hang down from that point. In some locations, we can have one power pole feeding multiple different sites, and if we can do that, a very economical way of doing that is to use a split 15 receptacle, which can reduce the cost when feeding multiple sites from the same stand. In order to do that, we need to break off the tab between the black and the red lines, and then it needs to be put on a 2-pole breaker. 72-104 tells us about our rules for our overcurrent devices and our disconnect switches for RVs. It states that every branch circuit needs properly rated overcurrent devices, and the disconnect must be accessible. There is nothing worse than pulling into a campsite where someone before you has already tripped a breaker and you can't find that breaker because it's not at the campsite itself. One way to accommodate this rule, and that is very common, is to use RV combination boxes. The RV combination box will have the disconnect and the overcurrent device as well as the outlet all in one location, and therefore it is very easy and quick to locate your disconnect switch for your unit. When it comes to overcurrent devices and disconnect switches for mobile home parks, 72-106 tells us that each mobile home lot needs to have a properly rated overcurrent device, which needs to be weatherproofed if it is outside. We would also need to have access to the disconnect. Keeping in mind that most mobile homes will be directly wired, this rule would also apply to anything that is cord connected as per 72-108. When it comes to deciding where to place the power post on an RV lot, it depends on a few different factors. We need to consider things such as what type of lot are we servicing, such as a back-in lot, a pull-in lot, or a pull-through lot. But we also have to consider what are the tip outs going to be like and where is the power connection on the RV itself. The code has designed their rules in order to accommodate both the tip outs as well as the connection ports on the units to make it accessible for most units. For our back-end lots, the power post is going to be found within 4.5 meters from the back of the parking pad. It must also be located on the driver's side of the pad and between 1.5 and 2.1 meters from that pad. This allows us to have our tip outs without any danger of hitting the power box. For our pull-in lots, where we're going to drive directly into the spot, it must be within 4.5 meters of the front of the parking pad, so where we enter the parking pad, and it still must be within 1.5 and 2.1 meters from the driver's side of the pad. Our last type of lot is a pull-through lot. With a pull-through lot, we must be within 4.9 meters of the back of the parking pad and the center line. So now we want to have that power post closer to the center of the lot, but behind the center line. It must still be located between 1.5 meters and 2.1 meters from the driver's side of the pad. And this way we can accommodate as many different possible units as we can for this type of pull-through lot. Now we have an idea of how to design an RV lot. We also need to have an idea of how to size it properly, which means that we need to be able to figure out how big our services and our feeders are going to be for our RV parks. Now keep in mind that we need to think about more than just our lots. We need to think about our lots and our camping sites. We need to think about any street lighting that might be there. If we have any other buildings such as outside washrooms, or if we have a cafeteria or anything else for group access. All these things will be different styles of loads, and we need to consider all of them. We're going to take a look at this example. Within this RV park, we have 26 total lots. 6 of the lots have 50 amp and 30 amp receptacles. 5 lots have only a 30 amp receptacle. 7 lots have both a 15 and a 30 amp receptacle. And lastly, we have 8 lots that have only a 15 amp receptacle. We need to pay attention to Rule 72.102. Subrule 3 says that if we do have split receptacles on our lots, the split receptacles will count as 2 receptacles. That is because I have 2 different circuits feeding this receptacle, so therefore they are on a 2-pole breaker. If I have multiple receptacles on the same lot, the largest one will apply to the service calculation. Therefore, I can ignore the smaller value of the 2. C says if the supply equipment is located to serve more than one site, then use the highest ampacity rating available to each site. This means that if I do have a power pole that is located so that there's multiple receptacles on it, such as a 15 and a 30 amp receptacle, I would apply the 30 amp receptacle to one site and I would apply the 15 amp receptacle to the other site. Our next step in figuring out our service is to determine what the wattage rating of each of our receptacles are going to be. 72.102 Subrule 2 breaks everything down for us in very clear terms. If I have a 50 amp receptacle, it's worth 12,000 watts. 30 amp receptacles are worth 3,600 watts, 20 amp receptacles are worth 2,400 watts, and 15 amp receptacles are worth 1,800 watts. If I had any other loads within the RV site, I would simply add the wattage rating of those loads as per other sections of this code. Subrule 4 goes on to say that if I have tenting sites within my RV park, each of the tenting sites that have either 15 or 20 amp receptacle is going to have a 600 watt load. The reason for this is because tenting typically has a lot less demand than trailer camping. Keep in mind to check on Appendix B. Appendix B states that if we are using our tenting services in our winter or in extreme summer, we can have additional loads such as air conditioning or heating, which could change our demand. Therefore, if we know our service is going to be used during those conditions, we need to use a higher value. Subrule number 5 states that the calculated load for the service or feeder supplying a recreational vehicle part shall be the sum of A, the receptacle loads as per Subrule 2 and 3 in accordance with Table 71, and B, the loads for recreational vehicle lots used exclusively for tenting purposes in accordance with Subrule number 4, and then C, all other loads as calculated by other sections of this code. When we look at Table 71, the title reads that it is for the calculated load for services and feeders for recreational vehicle parks. And then it goes on to say it is based on recreational vehicle lots from the highest to the lowest watt rating. That means we want to attribute the highest wattage rating first and work our way towards the lowest wattage rating. It's always a good idea to keep yourself organized. So to help us, I've put a chart on the top right corner to show us all of our lots within our RV park from their highest wattage rating down to lowest wattage rating. Table 71 divides everything into sections and then applies load percentages to those sections. You'll also notice that there is 2 different columns for my 120 volt receptacles and then another separate column for my 120 240 volt receptacles. When we are applying Table 71, we want to make sure that we are organized. With our site, we have a number of different lot types, and we notice that when we eliminate the smaller loads on the lots that have multiple receptacles, we can actually join together the 30 amp receptacles. In order to simplify our loads, I put the 3600 watt loads together. Now we can see that we have 6 loads of 12,000 watts, 12 loads of 3600 watts, and 8 loads at 1800 watts. Our next step is to apply these loads to Table 71, and drawing a new chart is generally a good way to start. We can see from our new chart that all the loads that we have are separated out into individual sections as per Table 71. The first section of Table 71 is for the first 9 receptacles. Therefore, we're going to take our largest receptacle, which is our 6 12,000 watt receptacles, and we're going to apply it to that first section. We still have 3 receptacles left over, so we're going to add in 3 of the 3600 watt receptacles. Once we dealt with the first 9, we're going to deal with the next 10 to 15, which is the next 6 units. I have 6 more 3600 watt receptacles to go in here, and so I will place them in this row. After that, we'll deal with the next 16 to 35 units, which is a group of 20 units. And I can put the last 3 3600 watt receptacles in there, as well as the 8 1800 watt receptacles. Once I've finished that, I've accounted for all the receptacles within my RV park, and all I need to do is add them all together to get a total wattage demand of 122,400 watts. Keep in mind that if this camping site had any tenting sites with receptacles, I would have to add those receptacles in at 600 watts each directly to the value that we have from Table 71. Those tenting sites are not to be included in the Table 71 calculations. Lastly, I will take my total calculated demand load divided by my voltage to get my total calculated ampacity of 510 amps. I take the 510 amps to Table 2, which states that I need to use a 900 kcmil conductor, and Table 13 tells me I need a 600 amp overcurrent device. When it comes to sizing mobile home park services and feeders, we look at Rule 72-102 Sub 1, which tells us that for our individual motorhome sites, we're going to use Rule 8200, so we treat them as a house. When it comes to looking at our entire mobile home park, we look at that as an apartment building. Therefore, we're going to use Rule 8202 in order to size the service for the entire mobile home park. This would also include any other buildings such as bars and pubs and common areas. We'd have to take those into account according to Rule 8202. We've now come to the end of 205H Part 2. Make sure you are reviewing how to size services for both RV parks as well as for mobile home parks, and be aware of the different types of receptacles that we can use inside our RV facilities. When you're ready, move on to the next video.